"The past is never dead," wrote William Faulkner. The past is never dead. It's not even past. It's never more true than at this time of year. As we gather in special surroundings, special decorations having been arranged, Advent and Christmas point to the past. They point to tradition, things we do every year. They point to events that took place millennia ago. We turn to years past this time every year as we seek direction and meaning in our own lives. The Old Testament prophet Jeremiah, I think, would agree with Faulkner. He might say it this way: the past isn't even past, it's all about today's expectation for the promise of tomorrow. You see, Jeremiah wrote all about God's promise. It's in our passage today from Jeremiah 33. He refers to this promise, and a reader dropped down in the middle of his prophecy might wonder exactly what promise is this that he refers to. And what we need to know about Jeremiah is that he writes at a time that was bleak. He writes at a time of hurt and sorrow. He writes at a time when Jerusalem is under siege. When there is an army assembling. Perhaps the war is already underway. Perhaps it is simply the promise that an army is marching toward Jerusalem, the city, the capital, the political center, the theological center, the place where the temple is located, the holy city of Jerusalem, under siege. And there's a conversation taking place about what this means. Does this mean all is lost? Does this mean that God once and for all has forsaken God's children? Does this mean that God has hidden God's face, turned God's back, and walked away? Or as one prophet said, it has the Spirit of God lifted up from the temple and flown over the mountain, never to return again? Or are things as Jeremiah says they are, that after the siege is over and after Jerusalem is in ruins for a while and after God's people are carried off into captivity, God will call God's children back unto God's self? So in chapter 33, verse 14, Jeremiah points backward. The past isn't even past. He says, "Remember my prophecy from chapter 23, where I said that God was going to raise up for us a new king, a king of wisdom, a king of justice, a king of righteousness. And remember that God said there will come a time for God's children when nobody will talk anymore about what I did for you when you were strangers in Egypt. Everybody will forget that I led you out of captivity. No one will bother to tell the story anymore about the wilderness wandering. Nobody will talk about crossing back into the promised land for one group of people who were sent to one nation because of what I'm about to do for all my people who are dispersed through all nations." That's a hopeful word. Jeremiah points to the past. He says, "Remember my prophecy from chapter 31. Where God gives what every coach or athlete in the room will recognize as a locker room speech. It is word for word a locker room speech. God says, I have broken you down, and now I'm going to build you back up. Those are God's words in chapter 31. In fact, I will place a new covenant in your hearts. I will place my word, my law within your hearts, and I will be your God, and you will be my people, and I will no longer remember your sin. You will be forgiven forever because of the new covenant." In our text today in Jeremiah 33, the prophet says, "Those days are coming when God will fulfill God's promise to the house of Israel that they will live in safety once again, and fulfill God's promise to the house of Judah that they will be saved because God is going to raise up a leader. Jeremiah calls this leader a righteous branch. A righteous branch. And I imagine that the Hebrew listeners to this prophecy took great joy in hearing that word, because the Hebrews loved some agriculture or some horticulture. They had no fewer than 10 different words in the ancient Hebrew language to describe different types of branches on a tree or a bush. So when they heard the prophet refer to the new leader as a righteous branch, I'm sure they perked up and asked, which kind? And Jeremiah went on. In verse 15, the word that he uses for a branch is a word that's used all throughout the Old Testament. We would say a sprout or a sprig or a shoot. It's the word that in Genesis Pharaoh used in describing his dream about the 7 stalks of grain, and each one gave sprout to 7 more stalks. The dream that Joseph interpreted and led him to find a home in the Pharaoh's house. It's the word that the prophet Isaiah used when he said on God's behalf, "Behold, I am going to do a new thing, and now it springs forth, it sprouts forth. Do you not perceive it?" It's the word that Ezekiel and the psalmist used to say for God, "I'm going to raise up a horn to sprout up for Israel." A sign that God has not abandoned us. Every time this word is used in the Old Testament, and it is used again and again, this word refers to the wild, creative, uncontrolled new life that comes every spring. The unexpected abundance that we find in God's creation, the wild power of our God. And Jeremiah says it refers here to the righteous, creative nature of God. No, the past isn't even past. It's all about waiting for that righteous branch. Even in the lowest place, especially in the lowest place, the valley of the shadow of death and destruction, you need, you're passionate for that branch the most in a time like this. They're desperate for it. They cry out for it. In Jeremiah's time, everything has been shattered, or everything is about to be shattered for Jerusalem. Just a few verses earlier in chapter 33, verse 4, he refers to a siege ramp. Do you know what that looked like in the ancient world? Imagine walking to the edge of the city and climbing up on the city wall, or imagine being one of those people who made your home within the city wall and looking out the window of your home and seeing day after day after day an invading army wheeling in wagon loads full of dirt and rubble from other cities that they have sacked and destroyed, and they are piling up a ramp outside your city because you're next. And day after day after day, the ramp gets higher and larger and closer to your home, closer to the wall of your city, and you are powerless to stop it. Your army can do nothing to stop it. That's the situation. That's the horrible reality. It is the ancient world equivalent of Pearl Harbor Day or 9/11 Day. Day after day after day in slow motion. The past isn't past on a day like that, when you're waiting for the righteous branch to save my life, my city, my people, my faith. Just a few generations later, a man named Judah the Maccabee, would raise up and he would revolt against the powers that be, and he would overthrow and he would establish a new regime, which soon thereafter led to more of the same. Just a few years before Jesus, there was the announcement from Rome that there had been a consolidation of power and there would be a new person known as Caesar. And we were to hail the emperor as the Son of God. More of the same. The past isn't even past when you're waiting for the righteous branch. Or when you are waiting for the Christ child. We arrive at this December, and I'm reminded of what C.S. Lewis wrote about a place that he identified on the map called Niatrib. You know about Niatrib? Niatrib is this little island off the northwest coast of Europe, triangular in shape. Some of you, I think, may have been to a place like this. Throughout the winter, it's usually rainy, foggy, cold in Niatrib, and the Niatribians celebrate a couple of holidays. You know, they dress similarly to the rest of the folks in Europe, but they speak a different language than the other Europeans. And the Niatribians will celebrate, most of them, a holiday that they call Xmas. It takes 50 days to get ready for Xmas. It's a 50-day period of time known as the Xmas Rush. And one of the things that everyone does in Niatrib getting ready for Xmas is they go out to the stores and they purchase pieces of paper on hard stock that on one side are blank, but on the other side are lovely pictures of things like holly bushes and trees. And they send these to everyone they can think of. And then when they go home, and if anyone else has sent them a card, they inspect it very carefully, and if it's a card from someone to whom they've already sent a card, well, they just tear up the card that they've received and throw it away. But if it is a card from someone that they hadn't thought of that needed to receive an Xmas card from them, well, then they say, "Curse this day," and they rush back out to the store and they purchase more Xmas cards to send out. And everyone celebrates Xmas. Except that there are a few people who celebrate another holiday, and it's actually celebrated on the same day as Xmas, and it's spelled Chrissmas, Christmas. And the folks who celebrate Christmas don't have to sleep off their holiday or drink off their holiday. In fact, they get up early on the day of their holiday, and they go to these places that have strange-looking high points out front. They call them steeples. And they come in and they sing special songs and they read special words. And they have a look of peace, tranquility. They talk about their lives as being more meaningful as having celebrated Christmas, when in comparison with the folks who celebrate Xmas, who look so miserable. C.S. Lewis reminds us, tongue-in-cheek, past isn't even past when we're waiting for the Christ child. It is among the most meaningful moments of the year, every year. And the past isn't even past as we wait for Christ to come again. As we wait for this world that is not our home to pass into the next life. In the Old Testament, God said to Moses, "My name is I am. When they ask you who sent you, tell them I am." Jesus said to his followers in the New Testament, "Before Abraham was, I am." Buechner puts it this way: before Abraham was, before any king rose up in Israel or any prophet to bedevil him, before any patriarch or priest, temple or Torah, something of Jesus existed. Before any of that, something of Jesus existed. No less truly, for having no name yet or a face, something holy and hidden, implicit, as sound is implicit in silence, or as the fall of Rome is implicit in the first atom sent spinning into creation. Everything about our world holds out hope. Hope that Jesus could be and is and shall be again. And He is waiting for us. We wait, we hope, we expect throughout Advent, and all the while He is waiting and hoping and expecting us. He is hoping, He is waiting for us to lean into God's wild, creative righteousness, foretold by Jeremiah and promised once again in our passage today. Now, some of us this year did the pre-waiting. We did the pre-waiting for the turkey to cook and for the bargains to come online. And some of us got caught up in the Black Friday and the Cyber Monday. But what about Giving Tuesday? Do you know about Giving Tuesday? I didn't know about it until the end of the day on Giving Tuesday. Nonprofits and organizations with a purpose tried to set aside that day as an opportunity to contribute to the Prince of Peace, the peacemaking of the Prince of Peace. He's waiting for us to lean into God's wild, creative imagination. So as we close today, I would say a word for how we might do that, how we might lean into this righteousness that Jeremiah promises. First, and I say this the first Sunday of Advent each and every year, before you put your head to the pillow tonight, on this first Sunday of Advent, I encourage you strongly to take your copy of the Bible. And if you do not own a copy of the Bible, there's one in the seat near you. Please take it with you as our Christmas gift to you early this year. And before you go to bed tonight, open it up to the Gospel of Luke and read the Christmas story, word for word, out loud, slowly, with meaning. That will bring you into the Christmas mood, the Christmas spirit. It will help you lean into God's creative, wild righteousness. Secondly, I encourage you to commit today to a spiritual discipline throughout the month of December. A simple spiritual discipline, but one that may challenge you as the days start to get away from you. And that discipline is this: spend 5 minutes each day during the month of December in silence. Not going over your shopping list, not thinking about the decorating or the cooking that needs to be done, simply in silence. If you are able to kneel in prayer during that time, it might help you. Or if you're able to sit close to a manger scene or sit with an open copy of the Scripture, however it might be for you, sit in silence just 5 minutes each day during this season. For this service, I would encourage you to give real consideration to what is happening tonight in the life of our church. When I was a little boy, my grandmothers lived in Roanoke, Virginia, and Little Rock, Arkansas, and we lived in Georgetown, Kentucky. I had never had a grandparent at a children's choir concert, but I had an adoptive grandparent or two who would show up and they would bless me. And I won't ask for an amen, but some of you think I turned out okay. So I would encourage you to give consideration You might be here tonight and make tonight's children's special a truly intergenerational moment in the life of our church. A blessing, an affirmation, even if you're not kin to anybody on the platform. It would be a blessing to them and to you. Lean into God's righteousness. In a moment, we'll learn about ways to give to the World Missions Offering, ways to contribute to the Elkhorn Baptist Association Toy Project. That event is scheduled for Thursday night, December 13th. Ways to contribute to those in our community who are desperately in need this year through our Christmas basket ministry. Those baskets will be delivered on Saturday, December 22nd. Or perhaps most importantly, certainly most importantly, as you consider leaning into God's wild, creative righteousness, if you've never given your life to Jesus Christ, let that be the way that you start off this Advent season, this Christmas season, by giving your life to Him and saying, yes, I abandon my selfishness, my brokenness, my sinfulness. I set it all aside and I lean into the arms of the righteous branch, seeking forgiveness and direction, seeking that you would make me clean and restore me to wholeness, that you would draw me into your love embrace and set me on pathways of righteousness for your name's sake. If you're ready to come home, if you're ready to say yes to Jesus Christ, if you're ready to follow Him, if you're ready to be a member of the life of this church, if you're ready to commit to leaning into God's wild, creative righteousness, then the next portion of this service is set aside for you. We enter into a time of response so that you can express your commitment to the Holy One. And if you are giving your life to Him, if you are making a decision for Him, then as we're singing this next song, would you simply step forward and share that decision with one of our pastors so that we can pray with you and grow together in the days ahead. May we stand and may we celebrate our God.